As of last year, I purchased the last N64 game that I needed to have a full 100% collection of the entire library. That's 296 American games in about 12 years. This console has partially shaped me into who I am today and the kind of games I enjoy playing, so I wanted to look back on some of those memories I had as a kid and check out some of the underrated games I missed out on, as well as other strange and obscure quirks about the console. When it comes to the Nintendo 64, I'm probably the most well known for Super Mario 64. I've beaten this game in VR, with my elbows, manipulating a Koopa to grab stars, and countless other ways. I got this game when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I remember spending a lot of time trying to figure out what to do. I never had time to get really good at these games because I was limited to 1 hour a day, almost every day for quite a few years. And that's just how things were in the 90s/early 2000s. Most parents didn't let their kids play games for very long, and it makes sense. They didn't have nearly as much value or popularity as they do today. So it took me a long time to fully beat Mario 64. In fact, I didn't 100% the game until I was a teenager. But as a kid, I remember a few stars that I got stuck on. Behind Chain Chomp's Gate always perplexed me. I remember thinking that maybe there was an opening inside this white mountain hidden somewhere. I would take the Koopa shell up top and didn't get far with that idea. So next was luring the Chain Chomp towards the gate, thinking that maybe he'll break it, until realizing that that wouldn't work either. At the time, I lived in Norway, and before leaving to go back to America, a friend of mine had come over and stomped on the pole which cued the Chain Chomp cutscene. This blew my goddamn mind, because I hadn't consider that after like 2 to 3 years of brainstorming. But that wasn't all. My friend and I used to say it was impossible to get 100 coins in TikTok clock as well. That's because we weren't skilled enough to climb up top and never found all these 10 coin boxes. And then there's of course Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I can't even begin to comprehend how much time I spent trying to solve the riddle for this star, because there were rainbows all over the place but never found a star in the air. I'm pretty certain that I didn't figure this out until I was like 15 or 16. But you'd think I could have just, looked it up, right? Well, I technically could have, but that never crossed my mind. And there was also another rule in my house. I was only allowed to own one console and one handheld at a time. So when I got a GameCube for Christmas, I had to sell my N64 and all the games for it. So by the time I purchased a Wii, I completely forgot about that game and was way more interested in playing Guitar Hero and Rock Band. I mean, seriously, there was a good 4 to 5 years where I had no interest in Nintendo games. I solely played Rock Band 2, Rock Band 3, Guitar Hero World Tour, Guitar Hero 3, and Guitar Hero Van Halen. This was my life from ages 13 to 16, roughly. All I wanted to do was play the guitar and drums. And I got really good at them too, to the point where I could actually play real drums fairly competently, but now I've gotten off track. The entire reason for bringing this up anyway was that I had never even finished Mario 64 until I reunited with another friend from several years ago. For those that have been around since the beginning, you may or may not remember Aaron. We made a few videos freaking out over Mario Party several years ago, and he's one of the sole reasons I got back into Nintendo. And I also have to give credit to Mario Galaxy for that. Like, my god, the first time playing that game was so freaking magical that I've replayed it almost every year for the past decade. But anyway, whenever I visited Aaron as a teenager, we would play a bunch of N64 games from Norway, or we'd just play some Call of Duty Zombies because Black Ops 2 had just dropped, and holy shit, that game was when COD was killing it. But what's interesting about the N64 was I think we were originally playing it out of sheer irony and for some nostalgic reasons too, but the more we played, the more fun and laughter we were getting out of it. And we actually ended up beating Mario 64 after all this time had passed. This is also when I started to speedrun it. I think the first time I ever got was like 6 hours or something. Nowadays, I can get around an hour in a 70-star run, which still isn't great, but a lot better than the first attempt, obviously. We got so into the N64 that we both started to buy more games for it, but I especially got really obsessed. Obsessed as in, I added 100 games to our collection. Yeah, I still got a video on this channel talking about those games from several years ago. And at that point, Aaron decided to just give me the 10 or so games he owned since I had already purchased so many. And honestly, he was the only real friend I had for a year or two. When I graduated high school and first went to community college, I only talked to one other person from school, and Aaron. That was about it. It was honestly a pretty bad year for me as I was getting over a rough breakup, didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and was struggling to grow on YouTube. but Aaron really helped me get through it. Almost every Friday night, I'd finish working at Papa John's after getting my schoolwork done, I'd grab a large pepperoni pizza from work, drive to his house, and we'd play Mario Party, Mario 64, and Pokemon Puzzle League until 4 in the morning. So I had a few days out of each month to really look forward to. And because the N64 was so attached to those vulnerable years, I've grown incredibly fond of the system. Its memories helped me through some lonely times, and I'll forever be thankful for those nights. But that's enough of my boo-hoo sob story. Let's get back to the game. Mario Party 1 is a game I've played a ton as a kid, teenager, and even to this day. I'm still playing it with the Minus World guys. It's actually incredible how well the original N64 titles have aged. They're a bit janky and slow and even unfair, but they're still such a blast to play. I never really played Mario Party 2 or 3 until I was older, and they're both really great too. But I will never forget how relentlessly mean-spirited the first game is towards each player. So for that, it'll probably always be my favorite. Smash Bros. 64 was also a massive part of my childhood. I used to be really good at this game, which is funny considering how bad I am at most Smash games now. It got to the point where I could have 3 level 9 computers fight against me, and I could take them all out no problem. But I also liked having items on and mastered the Bobo mechanics, which I know sounds weird, but hear me out. I would go into training and just practice throwing the bomb to get it down perfectly. I'm not sure what kind of 9-year-old kid would go out of their way to hyper-focus on something like that until I found out I was an Aspie several years later, and now everything makes sense. Woo! Local Fall Guy Gamer here. And those were the main games I played as a kid, but it wasn't all I had. Being super into Pokemon like every other kid in that time period, Pokemon Stadium was another fun one. I had always wanted Pokemon Stadium 2, but never had the money to afford it until I was in my 20s. And I definitely like the general gameplay of Stadium 2 more, but the mini games are a lot better in the first game, or the Kids Club as Pokemon Stadium titles it. Even today, these are really addicting and a lot of fun with friends. I like just about all of them except the Ekans one. Like, for real, what's with the controls? But anyway, I also owned Hey You Pikachu, and I think I played it like, I don't know, one time? Even at 9 years old, I knew this game was a piece of shit. But I also don't think I had the microphone attachment, which is kind of a problem because you literally need it to play the game. But Diddy Kong Racing, that's another one I really liked. But I didn't like it as much as Mario Kart 64. That's pretty funny looking back, seeing as Diddy Kong Racing is superior to Mario Kart 64 in almost every way, but I did spend a lot more time with Mario Kart in general. I don't have any distinct memories playing this game, outside of beating 150cc for the first time. As a 9-year-old with very little opportunities to play games, this felt like a massive feat. It was the Star Cup that I always struggled with, specifically Bowser's Castle. I still consider that to be the hardest track in the game. And as far as I'm aware, that's all the N64 games I owned. It was a small collection since I spent a lot more time on the Game Boy Color, but now that I've got all of them and play games for a living, I can finally take the time to try the ones I've missed out on. But before getting to that, you might be interested in how much this ended up costing. I don't have an exact amount on hand, but over the course of 12 years, I think I spent anywhere from $100 to $500 a year, and 64 for the most part is pretty cheap to collect for. But there's definitely some rare games out there. Daikatana, a game that tried to follow the footsteps of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, now cost around $76 used and $495 new. This game wasn't very good and sold extremely poorly, especially on PC. There wasn't even a port on the PlayStation, which would normally have been common practice. Goemon's Great Adventure is next. This one is around $107 used and $910 new. Box games have gotten ridiculous in price and don't get much better, as you'll see. This is another game that didn't sell very well. It's a 2.5D platformer, so I'm kind of intrigued to try this one out eventually. But at the time, 3D was all the rave, so people weren't interested in playing something so similar to what's on the SNES. Ogre Battle 64. Yeah, I remember getting this one for like $40 a long time ago. Now it's around $127 used and $800 new. And that's not even the most absurd price spike. Oh, just you wait. This game is a tactical RPG, but it wasn't promoted very heavily, and not that many copies were printed, so I'm not surprised that this one costs so much. Next, we have Conker's Bad Fur Day. I'm sure a lot of you already know what this game is. It's an over-the-top and crude 3D platformer where you play as a squirrel that smokes and drinks all the time. I remember buying this game for $60 and thought, wow, that's a lot to spend for such an old game, and that was when I was like 18 or 19 years old, so yeah, that was a lot for me. But now the game costs around $129 used and $510 new. Rare making a mature focused game is what ultimately hurt it. The game wasn't allowed to be talked about in magazines like Nintendo Power, and Europe wouldn't even publish it. But my god, Conker's Bad Fur Day is absolutely worth looking into for the sheer novelty of how absurd it really is. Bomberman 64: The Second Attack is one of the last games I got for my collection, and it was painful spending like $90 on it. Little did I know what COVID would do to game prices. Loose, it now costs $231 and brand new $1,200. I am so glad that I got the expensive games before 2020, because these would have been painful to buy. The Second Attack is a game that came out in 2000, so it's pretty late in the console's life cycle, which led to poor sales. And it doesn't help that it was received as fairly mediocre, and it was barely advertised in general. Worms Armageddon. Now this is a game I really gotta try. It's another one of the few that I had to spend around $100 to get, but now it's around 283 used and 1,200 new. Interestingly, compared to the other Rare games I've bought, this is considered to be the best one in the entire franchise, and has even been ported onto modern hardware like the PS5. The game didn't even sell poorly. It's just a really damn good game, which drives the price way up. Stunt Racer 64. Oh god, this was another painful one to get. I think I paid around $150-ish a few years ago? At least it's not the price it is now, which is around $389 used and $4,100 new. Yes, over $4,000 for a complete in-box copy. This is another game that struggled to sell well, and that's because of its exclusivity with Blockbuster. Yeah, we've made it to the Blockbuster games, which all have exorbitant prices because you could typically only rent the game there. However, there was actually an option to buy this game, but again, this was only a Blockbuster. Because of this, it's much more challenging to get this in box, as they were often used as display pieces in the stores. Super Bowling 64 is next, and I'm pretty sure I got a decent deal for this one. I remember paying around $100, which was amazing even for the time, but now it costs around $650 used or $1,100 new. But why does this one cost so much? Well, it's a basic-ass bowling game that came out in 2001. The same year as the GameCube. I don't know why anyone would buy this now or even back then, unless you're a hardcore collector like myself. Now, this next game in particular doesn't cost a lot, but one of the variants do, and that is Rampage 2 Universal Tour. On its own, you can get this used for about $25, but we're talking about the big box version. I didn't even know a big box version existed until very recently, and this box will rack you up $3,500. Honestly, if this were less than $1,000, I'd consider getting one, because the idea of a big boxed N64 game is fascinating to me. But what's so special about the box itself? A Rampage keychain. Yup, thousands of extra dollars for a keychain. But apparently very few of them are made, so I kinda get that. But now for the most expensive N64 game of all time, and will likely always be, Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut. Funnily enough, I could not have bought this game at a more perfect time. I ended up getting it for about $280 at PAX East 2020, which, yes, that is a lot, but let's keep in mind that this was a literal week before COVID happened. You want to know how much this game costs now? Around $900 used and $13,000 new. Now, there is a good reason for this, but man, imagine the dedication you would need to spend $13,000 for a boxed N64 game. It's quite literally just an investment at that point. So this game is basically Clay Fighter 63 1/3, but it has some updates and was re-released only in Blockbuster. The main difference gameplay-wise is that it added a few new characters that were cut from the original version, and you can also unlock Earthworm Jim, which is kinda cool. But unlike Stunt Racer 64, you could not buy this one anywhere. It was only available to rent. So I think it's fair that the box version costs so much for that reason. I actually played this game with Nintendo several years ago if you're curious what it's like. A few months ago, I made a community post and asked what were some of the most underrated N64 games. So based on some of your suggestions, I've picked 10 underrated games, or just stuff that I've played recently. And I wanted to start with Banjo-Kazooie. For years, I've been told that this game is infinitely better than Mario 64 in every way and that I've got to try it. So when it finally came out on Nintendo's online service, I gave it another go. Now, to clarify, I've tried to play this game like 4 or 5 times, and on each attempt I got bored after like an hour. But this time, I went all in and completed the entire thing. And I gotta be honest, I don't see how this is better than Mario 64. Now, are the music and locations more varied and interesting? Absolutely. Those are by far the highlights of Banjo-Kazooie. And I really like how much charm all the characters have too. It actually feels like you're playing as creatures with real traits and distinct personalities. But as for the gameplay, it's incredibly janky. Just moving around feels very slow and clunky. It feels like I'm playing in slow motion half the time. And I don't really like the idea of unlocking moves either. It makes Banjo-Kazooie feel very limited and less freeing at the beginning for no reason other than a sense of progression. Personally, I'd rather just have the full moveset and play the levels however I want, but that's just me. The biggest sin, however, is the fact that when you die, all the collectibles respawn. That is some actual bullshit. And yes, I know it's like that in Mario 64 when going for 100 coins, which sucks, but it's 100 times worse in this game because it takes like an hour to find everything. And these levels are way too big considering how slowly you move around. Now, I believe the Rare Replay versions have omitted the collectible respawning problem, which is great, but I was playing the original and didn't know that at the time. So if I ever play Banjo-Tooie, I'm playing the Rare Replay version with a higher frame rate and the quality of life improvements. But now I'm gonna try out Mischief Makers. As for my initial reaction, this game's weird. In fact, it just might be the weirdest game I've ever played. You play as Marina, this robot girl that has what looks like eyeballs on her hands. She's interesting to control because you can jetpack around and shake enemies to get gems, and yeah, you're gonna be shaken a lot. Marina says, "Shake, shake," every time she's shaking, so you better get used to that. And I kinda like the whole shaking idea, but I'm really not a fan of how the jetpack works. You have to double tap to activate your jetpack, which lets you go faster or jump higher. While you're able to spam this as much as you want, it's not very comfortable to do for long periods of time. You quite literally have to mash right or left on the D-pad to accomplish what's essentially just running. Why not have a dedicated jetpack button instead with a meter that has to refill over time? You've also got these creepy faces everywhere. I mean, seriously, all these blocks are looking straight into my soul and I don't like it. But despite all that, I really got into this game once I played it for a while. Every level is unique and different. You'll go from tripping balls with this rotating screen to making a boss punch themselves in the face, and then you'll turn this block you're shaking into a transformer just out of nowhere. This is a wonky game, and it could really use a remake with updated controls because more people should experience this one. And the way the ending works is really cool too. Basically, there's these hidden yellow gems in each level, and to get the full ending, you have to collect all of them. The amount of gems you get determines how long the ending plays. There's literally a timer. It's just such a bizarre yet intriguing concept. It makes you want to go for 100%. Next up is Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now, I've already played some of this in the past, but didn't get that far in it. I'm sure the majority of you are already aware of what this game is. You play as a raunchy squirrel that drinks, smokes, and is an all-around asshole. The main villain, Panther King, wants to use Conker as a lake for his table. I think that just that should give you a general vibe for how wild the story of this game is. While Conker's Bad Fur Day's extreme raunchiness is what makes it so special, there's some jokes that don't age well at all. Especially the one with the cogs, that's maybe going a bit too far. But that was kind of the point of the entire game, to be as offensive as humanly possible. And you've also got a bunch of corny movie references like The Matrix, Aliens, Saving Private Ryan, and the game adds its own flair to these references too. But the weirdest and most memorable moment is of course the Great and Mighty Pooh fight where he sings while you fight him. And then there's these sunflowers with tiggle bitties. Whoever came up with that design has got some interesting kinks, I imagine. But the main issue with the game is the outdated controls, especially when you get to the shooting sections. These work with an N64 controller once you get used to it, but it's definitely a pain trying to readjust to them. And the gameplay isn't all that great either. It's a lot of fetch quests and escort missions when you boil it down. The main selling point really comes down to see what happens next in the story. But the OST is fantastic. It's got a very old school cartoon kind of feel, which meshes surprisingly well with Conker's violent behavior. There's also multiplayer with a ton of different game modes, which is awesome, but again, the controls are pretty hard to get used to. This is one of those cult classic games that's worth at least trying, but maybe just play the remake on the Xbox since the controls and graphics are a lot better. So this is gonna sound random, but now I'm gonna try Toy Story 2. My editor loves the music in this game, so I'm basically just trying this out for him. And you know what? This was a pretty fun little platformer. Just remember to switch the cameras because the default one where you can't move it on your own was awful. But anyway, you play as Buzz Lightyear and you're running around a bunch of places collecting coins and getting planet tokens. These tokens are what progress you through the game. And you'll often do things like fight bosses, race the RC car, solve a basic puzzle, or find lost items. It's It's a pretty basic platformer, but it's fun to control and really brings Buzz Lightyear to life. It's a lot of fun running around and shooting lasers as Buzz. You can even charge up and do this spin attack with your wings. The levels are scaled just like they are in the movies, where you're just a toy running around your average everyday places. This game is no Mario 64, but this is one of those games you can play in an afternoon and it's a solid time. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really care much for Star Wars and never really got into it. It's an important and impactful franchise, obviously, but I just never gave the movies much of a chance. But the N64 games are all pretty good, and I wanted to try a bit more of Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. This plays a little bit like F-Zero, at least in terms of how fast you fly down the road. Your car can get damaged too, and if it hits too many things, it explodes and you lose a lot of time. With F-Zero, you can recharge your vehicle's health and have this risk-reward system with using your boost and avoid bumping into stuff. This game doesn't really have that mechanic, but instead you have gears you can switch into, and you can even upgrade your ship parts, which is nice and all, but I don't know, I didn't get much out of this. Part of it has to do with the fact that I don't know much about Star Wars to begin with. Maybe if I were a fan, I could recognize the locations and characters and it'd be a little bit more relatable, but as it stands, it's a fast-paced racing game and not much beyond that. Now onto Glover. This is one of the most unique 3D platformers I've played on the N64. It's another one I've played in the past, but didn't get very far into it. You play as a glove, and you have to roll a ball around to get to the end. This might sound simple, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. The controls are complex and take some time to get used to. With Glover, you can smack the ball, roll the ball, dribble the ball, throw the ball, change the ball into different forms, and run on top of the ball. That might sound fairly diverse, and it is, but in execution, the gameplay is beyond frustrating to control. Since the ball isn't attached to you, it is so easy for it to get knocked away or hit by something by accident, which makes you lose a life. Even Glover himself is a pain in the butt to move with. His turning is like too sharp, I guess? The camera basically locks on so tightly that it's disorienting when you're jumping in the air trying to regain control. It just feels really awkward. Throughout this game are a bunch of cards, and if you find them all in a level, you can unlock bonus levels. However, these cards are hidden really well, so good luck finding them all in your first go. And there's also a bug in the game where your save just doesn't save sometimes, so that's just lovely. So while I don't really find the game fun still, it's got a lot of charm and personality. The beginning hub world throws you into what's basically hell, and there's this evil glove called Cross Stitch. He doesn't really do much, he's just an evil glove. The soundtrack is also incredible. It just screams 90s and I really dig it. The locations are also very 90s-esque as well in design. It's like a cross between actual places and then you got a bunch of random blocks. Oh, and the cheat codes are super over the top. It's almost worth playing the game just to mess with the cheat codes. Even to this day, there isn't a 3D platformer like this one, so a remake would be great, but I highly doubt that'll ever happen. If there's one thing the N64 has, it's great racing games. But nobody talks about Beetle Adventure Racing. I think I've played like 5 minutes of this in the past and remember loving it, but now I finally got to really try it out. And yep, it's still a really damn good arcade racer. This came out when Beetles were super popular cars. Back in the day, people would play games on road trips where basically they would count who could spot the most Beetles, which is akin to today's Tesla. The controls do feel a little stiff when turning, but overall it's a lot of fun to control. These tracks are huge, which is actually great for a game like this, because if you fall behind, then you have a lot of chances to catch up. There aren't really items besides the nitro boost, but there are a lot of hidden shortcuts that aren't on your map. Exploration-based racing games are few and far between. The only other one I can think of is Sonic R, but maybe there's some other obvious ones that I've never heard of. It's also hilarious how the stats of the car are literally determined by the color. I mean, what other racing game does that? That's so funny. And then you can unlock a police beetle at the very end and he's like super powerful for no reason. This is one of those titles that could have only existed in this time period. And it's funny going back to it because all you drive are beetles and the gameplay is surprisingly solid still. So, you ever heard of Snowboard Kids? Well, I'm not playing that one. We're gonna play Snowboard Kids 2, because why not, right? I completely forgot the characters have massive noses. I don't know how I feel about that, but at least they look distinct. I gotta say though, I am really surprised at how well this game has held up. It really reminds me of Mario Kart 64 and Diddy Kong Racing in a lot of ways. There's a nice variety of tracks, you can use items, the music is super energetic, and the graphics are really colorful. Hell, there's even boss fights. Not even Mario Kart 64 can live up to that. My favorite part of this game though is the fact that you take a literal lift back up the mountain. Does it waste a lot of time? Yes. Is it charming as hell? Absolutely. Lootly it is. Heck, there's a level where the lift is just a turtle. This game also lets you customize your boards. You can use Wendy's internet, whatever that means. There's a cutscene where some kid blows up a snowman and it's freaking hilarious. This is truly a hidden gem in the N64's library that's worth checking out if you're into snowboarding or even just racing games. Now, I've heard people talk about Rocket Robot on Wheels for years, but I have no idea what this is. It's a 3D platformer where you play as a robot on one wheel. And holy hell, this is the smoothest N64 game I've ever played. Yes, even smoother than Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie. The way he jumps and moves around is so fluid and intuitive. It's really fun to just run around a level. I was not expecting that from a game that I've never heard of before. His main gimmick is a tractor beam, which can pick up objects and even swing off certain things. The physics engines are extremely well done, and a lot of the things you pick up are used for puzzles throughout the entire game. This is another collectathon, but because it controls so well and the vehicles you drive are so fun, it's one of the best ones out there. My only real issue with Rocket Robot on Wheels is the camera turning sound. It's kind of annoying and loud, but that's really about it. And for the final game to try today, we have Jet Force Gemini. This one is pretty well known at this point and was even included with Rare Replay. The main idea for this is you shoot a bunch of ant aliens and have to save the tribals. This game is pretty graphic even for a T rating. The aliens explode into chunks with green blood everywhere, and it's really satisfying if I'm being honest. The cutscenes are also really impressive for N64 standards. In fact, the presentation is fantastic. My only gripe with the presentation is the pause screen, which I know that sounds weird, but it legit takes like 5 seconds for pausing to load because of how detailed and animated it is. The controls also take some time to get used to. The best way I can describe it is that it's exactly like Melee's credit sequence. The cursor is stuck in the middle and you have to carefully aim each spot to hit the targets. So these controls kinda kills the game just because they're so outdated. But if you can adjust to them, this is a pretty solid time. The music in particular does a great job capturing the atmosphere. It feels like something that comes from a PS2 game, a whole generation ahead of itself. And the bosses are pretty cool too, but very tough. And there's even a hidden Diddy Kong racing track you can unlock. So yeah, this is a neat game, but it's another one that could really use a remake and will likely never get one. As I'm sure you've all noticed by now, all my N64 games have these tiny little box replicas. I was watching a Metal Jesus Rock video where he had them last year and thought they were so damn cool that I ended up buying a box for every N64 game. If any of you are interested in getting any for your retro stuff, you can go to miniboxgaming.com, there's a link in the description. This isn't a brand deal or anything, I just genuinely love how nice these boxes look, and if you buy them in bulk, it's not too spendy. And the selection they have is massive. I mean, there's boxes for just about every retro system out there. But anyway, now that I can actually see all the box art, let's go ahead and take a gander. 1080 snowboarding. How the hell am I just noticing that the title also has the words 1080? That's kind of goofy. This is a really fun snowboarding game actually. Not quite as ambitious as Snowboard Kids, but still a good time. Also, the dude's arm has the words Nintendo 64 on it. Never noticed that. The text on the back of Aero Fighter's Assault is really hard to read. Like, yes, I know the box is really small, but they put white text with no shadow over a bright yellow background. That's just a really bad idea in general. Aero Gauge though, now that's a pretty badass logo. I like this whole neon/ghetto look it's got going on. Now, something that's really interesting to note about the N64 boxes is the sides have a consistent yellow, red, green, and blue color scheme. What makes this so cool is you can display your games with whatever colors you want to, aside from the handful of games that don't follow this rule, like Majora's Mask. What the hell, guys, you messed it up. Have any of you ever noticed how gruesome Army Men Air Combat's box art is? We've got these Toy Story military guys fighting over a barbecue, and my man's feet are literally melting from the heat. That's messed up. Can we just talk about Sarge Hero's face? Look at how smug this dude is. And then there's this guy on the right that looks terrified. Oh man, I don't want to know what's going on with him. And on the left, we've got a random girl that's somewhat revealing. That's a weird way to try to sell your action game, considering this is about toy soldiers. But okay, whatever floats your boat, I guess. I'm sure she's involved in the game to some extent, but still, that's kind of weird. Banjo-Tooie's kind of funny because it's like the perfect YouTube thumbnail format. Big characters displayed on screen with a basic background. While I do like this and think it looks nice, Banjo-Kazooie's is also much more dynamic and interesting. The only caveat here is this weird white glow that was also added so they pop out a bit better. Both of these cases have their pros and cons, and I think it's interesting just to see how each tries to market themselves. Something else these boxes all have that were still really new at the time were the ESRB ratings, and on the back they'll often explain why it's rated that way. Bassmasters 2000 is literally just a phone number, which I think is hilarious. Were we supposed to call them to ask why it was rated E? Did anyone actually do this? Oh, battle tanks. This one predicts the future of 2001 AD. The world as you know it is no more. A deadly virus has wiped out 99% of the female population, and the few surviving women are now worshipped as queen lords. Apparently the point of this game is to save the remaining women and all of mankind. Kind of an insane story. Oh, but then the sequel is another apocalypse story, and it takes place in 2006. But this time, the Queen Lords are evil and you have to defeat them. Both of these games have such drastically different stories. I'm slightly curious to play these. Beetle Adventure Racing's box was cracking me up though. Look, we've got a picture of a car exploding, and the caption just says, "Ouch!" Ah, yeah, very painful for that car. Ooh, I just want to take a minute here to appreciate how eye-popping and fantastic Bomberman 64's art is. The stance of all the characters with the bomb in Bomberman's hand. Oh, it's just so eye-catching. Then we've got California Speed, another N64 game that tries using sex appeal to sell their title. Look, I don't think this practice is necessarily evil to sell stuff, but it's just very out of place here. Hell, the box itself says it's not an actual screenshot. What were they really trying to achieve? I mean, honestly. Carmageddon 64. The year is 2026, and fatal toxins have polluted the Earth's atmosphere. Chameleon's Twist box art is kind of wild. We've got an Orberman swirling his tongue around to eat a worm while an ice cream sandwich is coming after him, and then there's this bomb with a creepy smile just hanging out in the back. That sure is some box art, alright. Clay Fighter 63 1/3 is a super weird one. On the back there's a warning sign that says they don't have fighters named Ryu or Ken. Why on earth are you calling them out like that? Do you think people are that dumb that we all just assume that every fighting game is Street Fighter? Is this an inside joke I don't understand? Someone in the comments, let me know what's going on here because I'm very confused. Now, I wanted to go ahead and show you guys Clay Fighter's Sculptor's Cut box because it's almost impossible to find this anywhere, and there's really nothing spectacular about it, but I really like the cheeky "make it a blockbuster fight" quote. I don't know, the fact they snuck that in there is kind of funny. Cruisin' World, on the other hand, holy hell, this box art is hot. The dramatic close-up of the Ferrari with the world's treasures in the distance. This is some clean-ass artwork. And coming off of that, we've got Cyber Tiger. ECW Hardcore Revolution's logo has always bothered me because it looks like you're supposed to say Hardcore ECW Revolution when it's actually not like that. Imagine if Super Mario 64 was labeled as Mario 64 Super on the box. Wouldn't that be confusing? Golden Nugget 64 just might have the best E for Everyone rating I've ever seen. It's rated that way because of gaming. Yep, gaming! Wow, like I know this is a gambling game, but there's just something really funny about the box on the back saying E for Everyone because of gaming. I also still love how Mario Party 2 has Mario rocking a cowboy hat. This wouldn't happen in today's age, because nowadays he has to be the same in all his marketing, but not this game. It's slapped right on the front. NFL Blitz 2000 and 2001 have the exact same back art. I don't know, unless my boxes are wrong for some reason, this kind of screams why I think all sports games are the same. You know, a lot of people think that, but look at this, look at this. I hate to admit this, but goddamn, Super Bowling has got some good box art. Those colorful pins, the swishing bowling ball, which is perfectly aligned with the logo. It's literally just a bowling game, but it's got a nice looking box. You guys know how people look at the front of cars and see a face sometimes? Well, Top Gear Overdrive took that joke and made it real. I hate this. I really don't. Why? What's the first thing you think of when you hear the word chess? Is it the Twitch tournaments? Maybe it's one of those games you played as a kid. Or, how about that infamous chess club at school you never joined? Well, let's look at Virtual Chess 64. We've got a queen that's whacking some other girl with a fish. And that, my friend, is the N64. This video went all over the place, but yeah, this console's very special to me and probably always will be. And that's about all I have to say, so thanks for watching.